The town of Dry Bend didn't look like much, just a smear of wood and dust tucked between two canyon ridges, forgotten by railroads and lawmakers alike. The sun hung heavy over its rooftops like a sheriff's badge no longer polished. It was the kind of place where memories outlived men. Dust Creek Ranch lay a mile west of town, its fence posts bent like old knees and its cattle thinned to near starvation. The land was cracked, thirsty, and half-hearted, much like its owner. Clara Mayfield stood by the corral gate, her shawl catching wind like a flag of surrender. Her once bright eyes were dimmed by too many winters, and her hands, once soft from piano keys, were now worn from rope and rifle. She had buried her husband 3 winters ago. What cancer hadn't stolen, bullets had. The Red Claw gang, mean and lawless, had bled the valley dry with threats, theft, and torch. Her ranch had been the last to hold out, and for that, she paid in graves. Clara's daughter, Ellie, barely 7, hadn't spoken a word since that night. She trailed her mother in silence, clutching a wooden doll with missing eyes and a singed dress. Some said the girl had seen too much. Others said she was listening for her father's voice in the wind. On a Thursday that cracked hot and sharp, a stranger rode into town. He came not like thunder, but like mist, slow, deliberate, almost invisible. His hat was low, casting shadow over eyes that didn't seem to blink. He led a mule rather than a horse and carried no rifle, just a bedroll, a rope, and a pan tied to his pack. He stopped outside Dust Creek's gate as the sky began to bruise. He said. His voice was calm, with just enough gravel to carry weight. Clara squinted. If you're selling, I ain't buying. Not selling, he said. Looking for Wyke. I mend fences. Shoot coyotes. Don't eat much. She studied him. His clothes were patched but clean. His hands, though scarred, didn't shake. His boots were worn but silent. And his eyes, they held something she couldn't place. Not danger. Not sorrow. Something older. Like regret that had learned it to walk. You got a name? She asked. Luther, he replied. Luther Quinn. That night, she gave him a place in the barn. He didn't ask for more. He cleaned the troughs, patched 2 boards, and picked up every horseshoe without being told. Ellie watched him from the loft, doll pressed to her chest. Luther tipped his hat once, but she ducked behind the hay. In town, word spread faster than tumbleweed. Ranch Widows got herself a man, barked old Coop from the saloon. Nah, muttered the barber. He ain't no man, he's a ghost. Saw him lift a timber like it was nothing to. But Sheriff Joel McCready, a hard man with a limp and a broken badge strap, said nothing. When he saw Luther ride in, his eyes narrowed. He said the name once, under his breath. Quinn. Luther worked without question. He rose before the rooster and slept only after the stars had dimmed. He built back the west fence in 2 days, dug out the old well in 3, and coaxed a dying mare back to her feet using molasses and murmured kindness. Clara watched. She never said thank you, not aloud, but the way she left fresh bread on the barn rail spoke louder, and the way she looked at him across supper, not with love, but with wonder, said more than words. Ellie, still silent, left her doll one night near Luther's boots. He fixed its arm and sewed on new button eyes. The next morning, the doll was in her arms again, and she stood 5 feet closer than usual. He never mentioned it. Trouble came 3 nights later, riding on a blood-orange sky. 6 riders, red bandanas and horse scars, kicked up dust on the old wagon road. At their head was Vince Coulter, a man with wolf eyes and a missing thumb. Leader of the Red Claw gang, outlaw by choice, murderer by profession. He didn't knock. Clara met them with a shotgun, and Luther stood behind her, hands down, face unreadable. Clara, Coulter said, his voice like wet gravel, still keeping the place warm for ghosts. You've said your piece, Vince, she spat. This land ain't for sale. Coulter dismounted. No, but it might be for Ash. One more chance, darling. Sell, and I'll let you bury what's left with both hands. Luther stepped forward. She said no. Coulter turned. And you are? Luther looked him in the eye. A man with nothing left to lose. They stared. Then Coulter laughed. You got spirit, stranger. Shame it'll leak out so easy. He turned, spat, and rode off with his men, dragging the wind behind them. That night, the ranch was quiet, too quiet. Ellie stood at the barn door as Luther played a tune on an old piano he'd found under a tarp. It was cracked and flat, but his fingers brought it back to life like old fire and dying wood. He played Beautiful Dreamer, slow and soft. Clara stood in the doorway, arms crossed, unsure if she wanted to cry or smile. Then a sound broke the silence. A word. Mama. Clara spun. Ellie stood still, tears streaking her cheeks, her voice dry as bone, but real. Luther stopped playing. No one spoke. Clara dropped to her knees and wrapped her daughter tight. Her tears fell hot on dust. Luther tipped his hat and walked into the barn shadows. Later that night, McCready found Luther by the water pump. "Lucas Quinn," the sheriff said, voice low. "Didn't think I'd ever see that name walking again." Luther didn't look up. "That name died in Missouri." "Not in my books, it didn't. Pinkerton man. Outlaw before that. Good shot. Better heart." "Too many ghosts," Luther said. The sheriff spat. "Well, you picked the right place. Dry Bend's full of 'em." He paused. "You staying?" "For now," Luther said. The sheriff nodded. "Then make it count." As dawn broke over Dust Creek, the ranch looked different. Not repaired, not healed, but alive. The wind smelled of mesquite and music. Ellie's doll sat upright on the porch rail. The corral fence was straight. And Clara smiled without trying. But in the distance, dust rose again. And Luther, once known as outlaw, then agent, now labor, watched it come, quiet and ready. So when folks ask me if the West ever had a hero, I tell them, not the kind that wore white or rode stallions. No, sir. Sometimes the hero had a limp heart and blood on his hands. Sometimes he was just a man fixing fences and playing piano in the dark. But he made the world better, for one woman, one child, and one broken-down patch of land. That's enough. The days that followed were strange in their softness. Luther's presence had become part of the rhythm at Dust Creek Ranch, like the ticking of a wall clock or the soft creak of porchwood. He spoke little, worked hard, and carried a quiet that made even wild horses calmer. He never raised his voice, never showed anger, but his silence spoke volumes. Clara watched from the kitchen window each morning. She noticed how Luther would pause by Ellie's swing and give it the gentlest push before heading to the fields. He never expected thanks, never sought it, and that, perhaps, made his presence even more powerful. One warm dusk, Clara approached him with 2 mugs of coffee. He was repairing a section of the fence, shirt damp with sweat, hands steady. "You always this quiet?" she asked. Luther glanced up. "Noise don't fix much." She smiled faintly and handed him the mug. "Sometimes noise keeps a person sane." Luther took a sip. "Sometimes it don't." They stood in silence for a moment, looking out across the fading light. Clara broke it with a whisper. "They burned the barn that night. The one with Jacob's tools." He turned to her, slow and attentive. "I was in the house with Ellie," she continued. "Didn't hear the crackling until the flames kissed the roof. By the time I ran out, Jacob was already gone. Shot twice in the back. Said they wanted to send a message." Luther didn't speak. He set down the coffee and crouched to tie a broken wire, letting her words settle like dust on stone. "I buried him behind the orchard," Clara said. "He loved those trees, even when they stopped blooming." Finally, Luther stood. "Maybe it's time they bloomed again." She looked at him, not surprised, not hopeful, but with a stillness that ran deep. Then she walked away, leaving her coffee untouched. That night, under a sky bruised with twilight, Luther sat by the old piano in the barn again. The keys were uneven, out of tune, but his hands brought the meaning. Ellie peeked around the doorway, her doll hugged to her chest. Clara stood behind her, arms folded. He played Wayfaring Stranger. Halfway through, Ellie crossed the threshold, step by step, until she sat on the hay bale beside him. She said nothing, but when he finished, she gently touched a key, a soft, single note. Clara wept quietly from the doorway. Morning broad dust clouds on the southern ridge. Clara spotted them first, 6 riders, maybe more, pausing on the horizon like wolves testing a fence line. They didn't approach, didn't shout, just sat there watching. "They're measuring us," Luther said, standing beside her. "What do we do?" she asked. He didn't answer directly. "Best put the animals in the north pasture." Keep Ellie close. Make the barn less flammable. Clara nodded. 2 days later, the Red Claw gang returned. Not to bang. Not yet. Just to talk. Vince Coulter rode alone to the gate. His men waited behind like buzzards watching a dying day. Clara met him with her shotgun cradled. Luther standing beside her like a shadow. Thought you might reconsider, Coulter said with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. Clara said nothing. You're rebuilding. That's real cute. But I ain't here to play neighbor. This land's mine, whether you sign it over or I drag it out from under your bones. Luther stepped forward. You'll find harder ground here than you think. Coulter's gaze narrowed. You know, you talk mighty brave for someone who ain't even holding steel. Luther's eyes didn't blink. You think a gun makes a man brave? Coulter spat. No, but it sure makes the graves. He turned and rode off again, but this time, he left behind a silver coin nailed to the gatepost. Clara stared at it long after he was gone. It's a warning, she said. No, Luther replied. It's a promise. That night, Clara went into town. She needed to send a wire for help, perhaps to her cousin in Austin, or maybe just talk to someone who wasn't being hunted. Ellie stayed behind with Luther. By moonlight, he helped her plant small herbs in the old garden. She pointed to each one, her voice still quiet, but growing. Mint, lavender, sage. When she asked for roses, Luther gently shook his head. Too soon, he said. We plant strength first. Beauty comes later. Meanwhile in town, Sheriff McCready sat in his office, cleaning an old Colt that hadn't fired in years. Clara barged in, face pale. They're coming. Vince left a silver coin. It's a mark. McCready didn't flinch. I figured. Why won't you stop them? She asked. Because the law ain't worth spit when folks stop believing in it. And no jury west of the Pecos will hang Vince unless he burns the whole valley. Clara slammed her hands on his desk. So you'll wait until he kills us? McCready sighed. No, I'm waiting for him to make a mistake. Then I'll help bury him. Clara froze. You think Luther's bait? No, McCready said, loading a chamber. I think Luther's the hook. When Clara returned to the ranch, something had changed. The barn had a new door braced with metal. The east side now had sandbags near the fence. The broken windmill had been taken down, not for repair, but for parts. Luther met her at the porch, wiping sweat from his brow. Preparing for war, she asked. He gave a faint smile. Preparing for life. War just happens to be in the way. She stared at him. Who are you really? He hesitated. Then, a man who used to be the storm. Now I just want to be the roof. Clara looked away. You know they'll kill you. I know they'll try. She didn't respond. Just walked past him, into the house. But that night, when he returned to the barn, he found a folded note on the piano. For words, written in a woman's hand. Let the roses grow. The next morning, Luther saddled up at dawn and rode into Dry Bend alone. He stopped at the blacksmith, bought a custom rig, passed the churchyard, said nothing. At the tailor's, he paid to repair an old duster, stitched with faded letters, LQ. Then, at the sheriff's office, he dropped a folded sheet on McCready's desk. What's this? The sheriff asked. List of names. Where the Red Claw hides. Which caves, which barns, who they bribe. McCready raised a brow. How do you know? Luther met his eyes. I used to ride with them. Silence hung thick. You want me to hang you? McCready asked. No, Luther replied. I want you to hang them. That night, thunder rolled across the dry land, not from the sky, but from hooves. The Red Claw had begun to gather. In the barn, Ellie stood at the piano again, playing a broken tune with her tiny fingers. Outside, Clara lit lanterns along the fence line. And Luther, he cleaned a revolver with hands too practiced to belong to a ranch hand. He kissed the photo of a woman tucked in a locket, its face never shown to anyone. Then he placed it in a stool bag, just beneath a rose sprig Ellie had given him. So when folks ask why the outlaw came back, I tell them, because even thunder wants peace sometimes. But peace don't always come gentle. Sometimes it wears boots, plays piano, and digs graves for the men who bring shadows. The night before the storm, the stars above Dust Creek Ranch shined like a warning. Luther Quinn stood under the open sky, looking west toward the horizon. Coyotes howled far off. His coat, now mended and dark as nightshade, flapped in the dry wind. In his hand, a badge, not shining, not proud, but dulled, bent, and blood-stained. A Pinkerton shield, long abandoned. Inside the house, Clara tucked Ellie into bed. The child clutched her doll, which now wore a stitched red scarf, Luther's old bandana, cleaned and sewn just for her. It still smelled of leather and desert. Clara stepped out onto the porch and found Luther sitting on the edge, cleaning his colt piece by piece, like a priest polishing communion silver. "You were more than a drifter," she said. "I was a shadow," Luther replied, not looking up, one that thought he could outrun the sun. Clara sat beside him. "Why now? Why come back to the light?" Luther paused. "Because your little girl looked at me like I was good. And for the first time, I wanted her to be right." Earlier that day, word had spread across Dry Bend like wind across wheat. The Red Claw gang was gathering in full. Not a bluff this time, a siege. At the saloon, folks were splitting stakes and weighing options. Some talked of boarding up. Others packed wagons. But most, they just stared at the horizon, waiting for the devil to ride in. Sheriff McCready stepped into the room, dropped a set of wanted posters on the bar, and said, "We either make a stand or become a story someone else tells." Nobody moved, until an old trapper growled, "I'll be damned if I let Vince Coulter write my eulogy." One by one, hands raised. Pitchforks, scatterguns, long rifles. Not an army, but a town too tired to run. Back at the ranch, Clara found Luther in the orchard planting seeds by lantern light. "These won't bloom if we don't survive tomorrow," she said. Luther pressed the soil for him. "That's why I'm planting them tonight." She stepped closer, voice low. "I don't want you dying for us." He looked up, eyes deep and calm. "I'm not dying for you. I'm living for you. The dying part, that's just old business trying to catch up." Clara's breath caught. "What did you do, Luther?" He stood slowly and pulled from his stole bag the badge, bent and scorched. "I hunted bad men. Then I became one. Thought I could burn away the blood with more blood. Turns out, fire just feeds itself." "Why come here?" she whispered. He glanced at the house. "Because this place, Ellie, reminded me that not every flame ends in ash." That night, the gang struck early, a test raid. A barn lantern exploded. Shots rang out. The livestock panicked, but the ranch held. Luther fired from the rooftop, picking 2 men off their saddles with a precision that spoke of old battles. The others scattered, leaving one behind, gut-shot and crying under the north fence. Clara stood over the wounded man with a shotgun. "Why now?" she asked. The man spit blood. "Coulter's got a buyer. Railroad man from back east. This land's full of iron, water veins too. Worth killing for." McCready, who had arrived during the fray, cursed under his breath. "Not just greed. It's business with a revolver." The sheriff looked Luther up and down. "I should haul you in for past sins." "I'd let you," Luther said, reloading. "After tomorrow." McCready grunted. "You ever hear the name Ezekiel Grant?" Luther flinched. "Yay, my last partner. Set me up. Thought he died in a jail fire. He didn't. He's the one bankrolling Coulter." Silence stretched between them. "Then I guess," Luther said coldly, "it ain't just about land anymore." By dawn, the ranch was fortified like a frontier fort. Barrels, broken wagons, steel bracing the windows. Ellie held hammer nails, small hands, big heart. The townsfolk had come too. 10 men, 3 women, 2 preachers. Not much, but it was enough to show they'd fight for something more than survival. They'd fight for home. Clara kissed Ellie's head and sent her with old Mrs. Barker into the root cellar. "You come back to me," she told Luther at the gate. He touched her cheek. "Only death rides faster than I do." The gang arrived just as the sun breached the canyon rim. 15 men on horseback, Vince Coulter at the head, and beside him, a man in a black suit, no hat, silver cane, Ezekiel Grant. Luther's past in flesh. "Step aside, Quinn." Ezekiel shouted, his voice smooth as oil and twice as slick. "This land ain't yours." Luther stepped into the open. "No," he said, "but the people on it are." And I made peace with my ghosts, except for one. Ezekiel sneered. You gonna die for a widow and a patch of date? No, Luther said, raising his revolver. I'm gonna live by killing the last man who ever called me partner. And that's when the West stood still, when one man's past squared off with his promise. The first shot cracked the sky. Gunfire danced across Dust Creek like lightning in a storm. Soot, blood, and vengeance painted the morning. Luther moved like a man reborn, deadly, deliberate. His coat whipped as he ducked low, flanking, then rose behind a hay wagon to fire. The townsfolk, rough but resolute, returned fire from behind the fences. Clara, rifle braced on the porch rail, dropped two men trying to flank. McCready took a bullet to the leg, but dragged himself behind cover and kept shooting. The Red Claw fell one by one, not to justice, but to courage. And when the dust began to settle, Coulter rode alone toward the house, eyes wild, howling Luther's name. Luther stepped into the street. The duel was wordless. Coulter drew first, but Luther shot last, and only one man fell. As Clara ran to Luther, she saw the blood already spreading across his side. He stumbled, dropped to one knee. Clara knelt with him, pressing cloth to the wound. I told you not to die for us, she sobbed. I didn't, Luther whispered, smiling faintly. I died for me. Behind them, Ezekiel tried to crawl away. McCready limped over, rifle raised. But Clara shouted, Wait! She walked over, took the pistol from Ezekiel's hand, and tossed it into the date. You don't get to end this your way, she said. Luther's voice, faint but firm, called out, Let the law finish what it forgot. And that, young Yuan, was the day Dry Bend found its soul again. Not in the sound of gunfire, but in the silence after. Luther Quinn bled onto the parched earth of Dust Creek as the last echoes of gunfire faded into the canyon walls. Clara knelt beside him, her hands slick with blood and dust. Behind her, the townsfolk emerged one by one, hollow-eyed and rattled, holding on to victory as if it might collapse if they stopped believing in it. Stay with me, Clara whispered, brushing sweat from Luther's brow. You don't get to leave yet. Luther tried to speak but coughed instead. McCready, hobbling over with a grimace, crouched beside him and pulled a flask from his coat. Drink, damn you, the sheriff muttered. Luther took one sip, winced, then smiled faintly. That's not water. Wasn't meant to be. Ezekiel Grant, the man who once called Luther partner, now lay cuffed and blooded against the fence. McCready had personally locked his hands and promised him a trial. Not mercy, not vengeance, but justice. For once, the badge would mean something. The Red Claw gang was broken. Those who didn't die scattered into the wild. The townsfolk buried their dead behind the chapel, the fresh earth still warm. And when they carried the fallen into the church, Clara looked at Luther and said, You're not dying today. He whispered, You sure? She nodded. Because I still owe you a dance. The town doctor did what he could. The bullet had passed through Luther's ribs, a clean shot, but deep. Infection was the real threat. Clara boiled water and herbs for days. Ellie stood watch, placing her doll beside him as a silent guardian. He drifted in and out of sleep, haunted by visions of fire, old gunfights, and the face of a woman long dead, the woman from the locket, the one no one ever asked about. Once, when Clara pressed a cloth to his forehead, he stayed and whispered, Tell her. I tried. You'll tell her yourself, Clara replied. Someday. But not yet. Spring came early that year. The orchard bloomed. The roses, the ones planted on the blood-wet night before battle, opened with deep crimson petals. Clara smiled when she saw them. Ellie danced through the trees, speaking more every day, laughing again, chasing butterflies with bare feet. Luther sat on the porch, pale but upright, wrapped in a blanket. Thought you might like to play, Clara said, wheeling the piano out from the barn with the help of the townsfolk. He blinked in disbelief. That thing's older than the canyon. Still sings better than you, she teased. He chuckled, then winced. You're not wrong. His fingers found the keys. The sound, dusty, raw, and perfect, echoed across the ranch. Ellie leaned against him, humming. One afternoon, McCready returned with a telegram in hand. It's official, he said. The Pinkertons have dropped the bounty. Your name's clean. Luther raised a brow. Didn't know it was still deity. Macready leaned on the porch rail. I told him the truth. You dismantled the Red Claw, turned over evidence on Ezekiel, saved a town. They'll call it redemption. I just call it overdue. Luther nodded, silent. The sheriff hesitated, then added, There's talk of marking you deputy. Luther sipped his coffee and gave a half-smile. I'll think on it. After the roses bloom proper. On the anniversary of the showdown, the town of Dry Bend held a gathering. Children played in the street. The church bell rang for peace. And Clara, in a blue dress Jacob once bought her, walked to the center square with Luther on her arm. Ellie clutched both their hands. Say a few words, the preacher urged him. Luther stepped up. He cleared his throat. I ain't no preacher, he began. Ain't no hero, either. Just a man who got tired of running He paused, eyes sweeping over the faces in the crowd. This land, this dust, these folks, they reminded me what life's for. It ain't just surviving. It's belonging. And if an old outlaw can find his place in the sun, maybe we all can. The applause was soft, respectful. But in Clara's eyes was something brighter than pride. It was love. Later that night, when the stars lit the sky like oil lamps spilled over heaven, Clara and Luther danced by the barn. No music, just crickets, wind, and the rustle of cottonwood leaves. She laid her head on his shoulder. You ever think we'd get this far? She asked. Not once, he whispered. But I'm glad I was wrong. And so the tale ends not with a bang, but with a breath. A man who carved peace from gunpowder, a woman who learned to love again, and a child who remembered how to smile. They say the piano still plays at dusk when no one's around, and that under the orchard, wild roses grow thicker every year. That's it. That's the story of the gentle outlaw.